What's up guys, I'm Brad Rodriguez from Fix This Build That, and today I'm going to show you how to make a DIY dresser. I made this one for my daughter and I got all the materials for the build at the local home center. Now this build has easy joinery that anyone can do. Stay tuned, I'll show you just how I did it. The DIY dresser is made from 3/4 inch plywood and dimensional lumber. I started by breaking down the plywood into manageable pieces with my Kreg AccuCut guide and my cordless circular saw. Next I took the smaller pieces to the table saw and I cut parts for the sides of the dresser. These plywood panels will be joined to the legs using pocket screws, so I drilled pocket holes down the length of each panel. The legs are made from 2x2s. I cut all 4 of them to size on my miter saw using a stop block for the repeated cuts. I lined up the legs and I marked the ends to keep them in order. And then I laid out cut lines for a groove or a rabbet on the inside of the back legs. This recess will hold a 1/4 inch plywood back panel flush on the back of the dresser when I install it. And the rabbet cut can be made with 2 cuts on the table saw. The first cut defines the width of the rabbet, and the second one defines the depth, and it also frees the off cut. Now this feature could also be made with a router bit if you don't have access to a table saw. To assemble the sides, I laid some 3/4 inch spacers on my bench to lift the plywood panel up to the same height as the legs. I put glue on the legs and then I clamped them in place and secured them to the panel with pocket screws. A flush fit on the inside is going to let me mount the drawer slides easily later. I cut 2 pieces of trim to size to finish off the outside of the side panels. A 1x2 glued and brad nailed to the top, and a 1x3 for the bottom gives the side panel a nice frame and panel look. To give the dresser a little more detail, I trimmed the frame of the sides with cove molding. I'd cut one end of the molding, take it to the side, mark the fit for the next miter, and then make that cut. I like to mark just slightly long when doing miter work like this, and after the initial cut I'll test fit and then take whatever little bit needs to be off after that. I'd rather sneak up on this cut than to cut it too short trying to get it right the first time. When all the parts were dry fit, I came back and secured them all with a 23 gauge pin nailer, but a brad nailer or finish nails works fine here too. The sides of the dresser are connected by a bottom panel and stretchers on the top and middle, which make the opening for the top drawers. I cut the bottom and the back stretchers from 3/4 inch plywood, but for the visible front stretchers and bottom trim, I used 3/4 inch solid wood. I drilled pocket holes around the bottom panel to connect the trim and secure the sides. I also drilled holes in the ends of the stretchers to join the sides. Now all these holes are going to be hidden after assembly. For the bottom panel, I started by attaching the solid wood 1x3 trim to the front. Then I secured the plywood back trim the same way. Securely clamping everything to a flat bench or work surface is really key here since you can't see the top of the joint with the panel upside down. In my design, the legs stand proud of the drawers and the front trim by 3/8 of an inch. I like the extra shadow lines and interest this gives the piece. So I marked a reference line for the setback on the front of the legs, and then I secured the bottom panel in place with pocket screws. Then I moved up and secured the top stretchers in place as well. And using a scrap piece clamped down to position the stretchers helps keep them aligned while screwing them down. I measured down to establish the drawer opening for my top drawers. Then I clamped the scrap in place for reference and secured the middle stretchers as well. With all the cross pieces connected to one side, I moved the assembly out of the way and then I laid down the other side on the bench and put the assembly on top. And working with gravity on my side always seems to go a little more smoothly. After I attached the bottom and top stretchers, I cut the center divider for the stretchers. I sized it based on the opening between the stretchers on the other side. This helped me make sure that the opening on this side was the exact same as the first one. To finish off the connections on the top, I installed the center divider on the front and cut another one that I attached between the back stretchers. The drawer slides for the top drawers need an attachment point in the center, so I cut and installed a piece for that as well. Now both center dividers and the center mounting cleat are from 3/4 inch solid wood, so the mounting surface is going to be flush on both sides. With all the cabinet structure done, I moved on to making the drawers for the dresser. Now, this dresser has 2 small top drawers that fit in the openings that I just made, and a bay of 4 drawers that will fit down below in the open space. The drawers are made from 3/4 inch plywood, and I actually made a whole separate video on how to make easy DIY drawers when I made it. I go into a lot of detail around sizing drawers, working with undersized plywood versus full 3/4 inch stock, and 2 different options for drawer bottoms. There's a link in the video description and a card up above if you want to check out the detailed how-to video. Now the heart of the drawers in this entire build is the pocket hole joinery. I want to thank Craig Tool, the sponsor of today's video, who makes the K4 pocket hole jig and many other jigs and clamps that I use in a lot of my builds. The K4 jig is great for making a lot of pocket holes quickly, and it's much faster than the smaller jigs. I'll have a link down below in the description to the K4, along with the other Craig tools that I used today, like the AccuCut track and the cabinet hardware jig that I'll be using to install the drawer pulls. Before mounting the drawers, I installed a 1/4 inch plywood back panel into the rabbet grooves that I cut earlier. I nailed it in place with 18 gauge brad nails, and this helps keep the dresser square and prevents racking. Oh, and you probably noticed I painted the cabinet white. I just used a semi-gloss white paint, nothing special here. To mount the drawers and account for the 3/8 of an inch setback, I set a scrap of plywood flush to the front of the middle stretcher to represent the false drawer fronts. I set my combination square flush with the back of that piece of plywood, and this gives me the distance to set back the drawer slide hardware. I started at the bottom of the dresser cabinet, and I used a 1x4 as a spacer for the first drawer slide to sit on. Then I pre-drilled and attached the slide with screws. I switched to a larger spacer for the next drawer slide and clamped it in place on top of the first slide. Using full-size spacers like this makes the drawer slide install quick and easy. Just clamp the spacer in place to keep it from falling, then position and attach the drawer slides for each drawer. An easy way to size a spacer like this is to take the distance that you want from the top of one drawer to the top of the next drawer. Then just subtract the height of your drawer slides. And this is going to give you consistent spacing between your slides, and it makes install a breeze for these full extension drawer slides. To install the bottom drawer, I laid down a few strips of plywood offcuts to lift the drawer up off the base, and then I started attaching the drawer slides. I pulled the drawer out enough to get to the first mounting holes, then I flushed up the slide with the front of the drawer and secured a screw on each side. Next I pulled it out a little further and secured another screw on each side. I took out the drawer completely to access the back mounting holes and put a third screw on each side, then reinstalled the drawer. For the next one, I used 2 plywood scraps stacked on each side of the lower drawer as spacers. Then I just repeated the same steps as before to secure the 3 screws per side. I repeated this 2 more times and I had all 4 drawers installed. For the top drawers, I installed the slides the same way as before, using a small spacer in my combination square to offset the slides. Then I used the plywood strips I used for the bottom drawer and mounted the drawer in the slots the same way. And once you do the mounting process, it's pretty straightforward to do any drawer. You just need to have the right combination of spacers for your application. Next, I made the top for the dresser. I was going to go with a solid wood glue up for the top, but I had plenty of plywood left over and I wanted to put it to use. So I cut a plywood center panel, and I drilled pocket holes around the edge to attach a picture frame mitered trim. I used 1x3s for the mitered frame to give a nice solid wood look around the edge, and then the paint will hide the transition to the plywood panel. I cut the miter similar to how I cut the cove molding for the sides earlier. I did this all the way around the panel until I had 4 fairly tight-fitting miters. I attached the miter frame with pocket screws and glue, making sure to get lots of glue on the miter joints. After securing all the pieces, I flipped it over and cleaned up any glue squeeze out before moving on to the drawer fronts. The last part that needed to be cut were these false drawer fronts. I cut the drawer fronts from plywood and I sized them for an 1/8 inch reveal around each drawer. Now in the past I've used spackle to seal the edges before painting, but I wanted to try iron-on edge banding this time. The banding has a heat-activated glue and you just press a hot iron on it. After it cools down and dries, you just come back with a chisel or a razor blade and trim off the excess. Now honestly, I didn't like this approach. It took just as long as the spackle, and trimming the excess of the banding was a bit finicky. I painted the top and the drawer fronts, and then I was ready for install. To put the drawer fronts on, I drilled holes in the drawer box and then positioned the drawer front. Now for inset drawers like these, I use a card trick to get perfect spacing. I set the drawer front on the opening, then fill the gap on the top with as many cards as I can. Then I split the stack in half and put one half under each end of the drawer, and this gives a consistent gap on the top and the bottom. I use the same trick for the sides, and then I attach the drawer fronts with screws from the inside. For the lower drawer fronts, I start from the bottom and I used an 1/8 of an inch spacer on the top of the drawer to position the next drawer front. It went quickly, and then I had all the drawer fronts in place for the dresser. And the top of the dresser is attached using some small cleats that I cut for the top. I screwed the cleats between the top stretchers, then I pre-drilled holes through the top of each of them. I centered and clamped down the top, and I attached it with screws. And since I'm attaching it into plywood, I don't need to factor in any wood movement, which is really nice. Now the last bit of cleanup was to install the drawer pulls. I used my Craig cabinet hardware jig, which helped me easily center the pulls on the upper cabinets. Then I made an adjustment for the larger lower drawers and finished off the lower drawers with knobs, lining them up with the top drawer for a nice neat line of pulls. And here she is all buttoned up. Now if you've got a good eye, you probably notice a bevel on the underside of the top that wasn't there just a second ago. I noticed something a little bit off about the piece, and I decided to throw this 45-degree under bevel on the top at the last minute. And it really added that great finishing touch I think it needed. My daughter is super pumped about her new dresser. If you want to build your own DIY dresser, there's a link down below in the description. You can check it out. It'll take you to the plans that have 3D parts diagrams, a cut list, as well as all the materials and step-by-step instructions that you'll need. If you're not subscribed to the channel already, I'd love to have you as part of the team. And until next time, guys, get out there and build something awesome.